Hi there, welcome back to my channel. This week is my sort of kind of last week in the Very Yellow Flat. I have this video, this book review, one more book review, and that's going to sort of serve as my transition between Edinburgh and the States. So be prepared for that. I'm very excited, and I think I have so many plans. Oh boy. Okay. Anyways, let's get started with this week's book review. So I'm going to be talking this week about Teresa Valentino's book, Dear Jimmy. Now, I'm going to give you a little warning before I go into this. This is not a lighthearted book. This is a nonfiction piece, sort of a memoir, sort of a political, social statement. And if you don't care for discussion of well, I'm just gonna go out and say of child molestation, don't watch this video and don't read this book. It is Teresa's story, and it's a very heavy story, and it's very, well, anyways, so just be aware of this. This book is set in the premise of writing a letter to Jimmy Kimmel without expecting a reply. And she's writing this letter because she's making a statement about how this problem within our society persists, and it specifically follows the Me Too movement with her own experiences as a child. So this is the patriarchal society that's kind of persisting, and why it persists, and why there's this power imbalance. And even those people who say, oh well, there isn't really a power imbalance and I'm all for this, is sometimes isn't helping the problem. But specifically she's talking about why the man show, which I had never heard of before this book, is such a problem, and why the people who hold this celebrity power kind of have this almost obligation to help society and help this problem go away. So these books always make me a little bit apprehensive to read. That's why I don't read all that many of them, because they are really dark. They highlight a lot of the major problems in society, and they also bring out huge amounts of cynicism within me, and it's hard to acknowledge that every single day. And I realize that this is a problem, and I am all for this change and this Me Too movement, but I have a hard time reading these books. They make me, it's very challenging for me. But that being said, I think this book was necessary. I think it needed to be said, and I think it was said in a way that was not antagonistic, I guess. It was more just relaying a personal opinion and a personal story and saying, this is what I feel, and this is why I feel like this is a problem, and why you are continuing on with this problem and you're furthering this problem. So this book specifically asks a lot of difficult questions about sex offenders and why people are apologetic about these sex offenders, and they still manage to place the blame on the people who were sexually assaulted, and they agree that they have the support of their victims, and it's kind of making them complicit, but it is also not true in a way. There's people are working out of a state of, I guess, ignorance, but also kind of this is a really hard topic for me. Also kind of, they're only aware of a certain system, and so this is the system. This is the kind of the way it's always been, and these people are successful in this system, and that's why they think it's okay. On to the actual story itself was hard to read, and not just because it's a difficult topic. This letter was a bit patchy. There were a lot of contextual pieces that I didn't understand. It's probably because I'm too young to actually know the specific context of things like the man show, but it definitely brought up a lot of salient points that were hard to read through, hard to think about in a meaningful way, but necessary, absolutely necessary. The actual story itself, after the initial letter, the introduction, brings about the context of when it's being written. I mean, this whole book is set up in the form of a letter, but it's in different parts. And so the first part is like directly addressing Jimmy Kimmel, and then it goes on to the actual story, Teresa's story. So the second part brings out the context and sort of fills in the gaps in the letter that I didn't have before, which I think was helpful. So it definitely, I think the story probably could have been restructured a bit to bring that context into the first part and make it consistent throughout, because that did leave a bit of a gap and made me wondering what the heck was going on, because I didn't have that context. But once you get into the story, you begin to understand what's actually happening and what has happened and why this is important. The narrative style itself is very almost flighty, and it runs together. It's not cohesive, but it is coherent. It jumps around in different times, but it makes sense as a whole, but the individual pieces don't necessarily fall together, if that makes sense. And I think this is probably the case because of the psychological distance that is necessary for Teresa to write this story. She mentions that she has this sort of dissociative kind of viewing of her own experiences, and she doesn't always recognize them as having happened to her, but more of this happened to this body that I'm carrying around. And so I think that shows in the story, shows in her narration of these events, because there's very much emotional distance there. You don't actually get that emotional connection to these events, and I think that is a very important reflection of how traumatic this was and how difficult it is to live through and how much it affects the rest of your life. So that being said, there were a lot of phrases in there that were actually very difficult for me to understand from a linguistic point of view. And I'm not sure if that's because it was slang that I'm unfamiliar with, or if it was pop culture references that were sort of outside of my time, because I tend to... I fall in the millennial category just barely, but I've also like grown up reading a lot of really quite a bit older novels, things from the early 20th century and the 19th century and even the 18th century, depending on what it was that I was reading. So I'm not familiar with a lot of the slang that people use. I think that made it difficult for me to sort of understand the story, on top of the fact that it was emotionally distant and sort of jumped around in different times. I think the story needed to be told. I think there are a huge amount of problems within our society that people are sort of glossing over or not meaning to address, or not choosing to address, and that's a huge problem. I don't think that this story was told to get sympathy from people. I think it was told in order to say, this is a problem and we need to fix this problem, and here's why. That being said, my overall impression of the story was that it was necessary but difficult to read for more than just subject matter. It was also linguistically difficult for me to get through, and considering that it was such a short piece, that confused me a bit. So I guess I was left more confused about what's next, what the next steps should be. This definitely identifies the problem, and says it needs to be solved, and I agree with that, but I don't know what the next steps are in order to sort of fix this problem. The story leaves me a bit unclear about all of that, and unclear about what's going on. And I think some of the metaphors that were used at the very end, talking about like restaurants and dining at certain restaurants, I think that left the point a little bit too vague. So it was kind of, I get the metaphor and I get what you're saying, but the fact that I have to dig through this metaphor makes it kind of tough for me to figure out, okay, what are you saying? Why are you saying it in this particular way? And what can I do next to help with this problem? Overall, I'd say story-wise, like narrative and considering language and actual writing style, I'd give it probably 3 stars. In terms of subject matter and addressing this pervasive problem within society, I'd give it probably 4 stars. It's not an easy book to read, but it is a good book, and it's a necessary one. So you can take that as you will. Honestly, I don't tend to pick these up as I'm browsing through bookstores because they are difficult, but I understand why people tell these stories, and I definitely agree that they need to be told. So just if you're interested in learning more about these problems that we have in our society and one person's perspective on this, about how it happened, and you can choose to do something about it and choose to help break this cycle, a repressive power dynamic within our society, then I would recommend this book. If you're interested in learning more about her story, about Teresa Valentino's story, I will leave links to her blog and social media in the description box, and I hope you guys do check them out because I think this is a very powerful story and it needs to be told, and it may be hard to do, hard to get through, but I think there are some things that challenge us in life that are necessary, and they help us to become better people, and they help us to become better members of society, and they overall help society to sort of change, hopefully for the better. So I think these challenges, they're hard, but important. So please do go check this out. I will leave all the links in the description. If you're interested in having your book reviewed, please let me know, send me a message, and tell me what you think about this story and about stories like this, because I do want to have a discussion, and I want to know more about what you lovely people think. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.